World leaders. Adolf Hitler came to power in 1933 as the head of a National Socialist or Nazi movement. Hitler was bitter over World War I. He blamed the Jews for all of the Germans' problems and saying the supremacy of the Aryan race of blood, blue-eyed Germans and blonde hairs is the superior race. He killed millions of Jews and sent millions to concentration camps. This became known as the Holocaust. It is still big today, and there are many museums that focus only around the Holocaust. He pushed a totalitarian dictatorship where the Nazi Party ruled and the Fuhrer were supreme. Hitler took Germany out of the League of Nations, reoccupied the Rhineland, and denounced the Treaty of Versailles. In Italy, another dictator, Benito Mussolini, had come to power in 1922. He worked very aggressively on foreign policy in 1935. Haile Selassie asked for support from the League of Nations because of Hitler invading independent African nation of Ethiopia. Everyone played right into Adolf Hitler's grasp, and his quest to take over Europe proceeded, and with no worry of American interference. In March 1938, he seized Austria in a bloodless upholding battle. Hitler sent his armies into Poland with tremendous force and firepower, devastating the country. German troops observed as the German Luftwaffe bombs Warsaw in September 1939, destroying the city and forcing its inhabitants to surrender. 6 months later, he was demanding the Sudetenland, a province of Czechoslovakia, with a large German population. Hitler wanted to take over Germany and all the surrounding countries. He wanted to rule Europe as his own. The British and French leaders agreed to meet with Hitler at Munich. Franklin D. Roosevelt voiced his approval, and 6 months later, Hitler violated his promise and seized almost all of Czechoslovakia. On September 1st, 1939, Hitler began World War II by invading Poland. England and France responded 2 days later by declaring war on Germany. Russia and Hitler signed a peace treaty, which means that Russia was helping Germany in the destruction of the rest of the world. Germans seized Denmark, and then straight after they seized Norway. And on May 10th, 1940, they unleashed the Blitzkrieg, which is a lightning war on the Western Front. Hitler had taken only 6 weeks to achieve what Germany had failed to do in around 4 years of fighting in World War I. They wanted to be strong and independent leaders, but failed in World War I, which is where Hitler started to achieve in World War II. In Europe, Hitler's armies controlled virtually the entire continent, from Norway in the south to Greece in the south. To Greece in the south. German armies went deep into Russia after an invasion in June 1941. They failed to capture Moscow or Leningrad. The Nazi forces had conquered Ukraine, and by spring of 1942 were threatening to sweep across the Volga River and seize vital oil fields in the Cascades. The next 2 years, the U.S. and its allies would finally halt. the German and Japanese offenses in Europe and Asia. Hoping to catch Hitler by surprise, Eisenhower chose the Normandy Peninsula. Hitler took advantage of a counterattack. Hitler delayed Eisenhower's advance into Germany, but he also had fatally weakened German resistance in the West. With the Red Army already in the suburbs of Berlin, Adolf Hitler committed suicide and also killed his wife on April 30th. A week later, on May 7th, 1945, Eisenhower accepted the unconditional surrender of all German forces. Many years later, they found out that Hitler was actually also Jewish, which counteracts with his policy of all Jews are at fault for the German downfall. So, in conclusion, he killed many of his own people. Winston Churchill. Winston Churchill was a British politician, army officer, and writer who served as Prime Minister of the United Kingdom from 1940 to 1945, and again from 1951 to 1955. British Prime Minister Winston Churchill's warning that England was running out of money. Winston Churchill was born in 1874 and died in 1965. He was born to an aristocratic family in 1874. Churchill served in the British Army and worked as a writer before earning election to Parliament in 1900. After becoming Prime Minister in 1940, Churchill helped lead a successful Allied strategy with the United States and Soviet Union during World War II to defeat the Axis powers and post-war peace. Elected Prime Minister again in 1951 to introduce key domestic reforms. Him and his men defeated Hitler and the Nazis. He topped the list of the greatest British of all time. In 1908, Winston Churchill married Clementine Hazer after a short courtship. The couple had 5 children together: Diana, Randolph, Sarah, Marigold, and this one died as a toddler of tonsillitis, and also Mary. In 1953, Churchill was knighted by Queen Elizabeth II. The same year, he was named the recipient of the Nobel Prize for Literature. On September 3rd, 1939, the day Britain declared war on Germany, Churchill was appointed First Lord of the Admiral and a member of the War Cabinet. By April 1940, he became chairman of the Military Coordination Committee. Later that month, Germany invaded and occupied Norway. This was a setback for Chamberlain, who resisted Churchill's proposal that British preempted German aggression. On May 10, 1940, King George VI appointed Churchill as Prime Minister and Minister of Defense. Churchill reformed a coalition of leaders from the Labour, Liberal, and Conservative parties. On June 18, 1940, Churchill made one of his iconic speeches to the House of Commons, warning that the Battle of Britain was about to begin. Churchill was confident that the Allies would eventually win in the war. Churchill worked closely with U.S. President Roosevelt and Soviet Union leader Stalin to forge an Allied war strategy in post-war world. Churchill tried to propose plans for social reforms in Britain, but was unable to convince the public of the reforms. Despite Germany's surrender on May 7, 1945, Churchill was defeated in the general election in July 1945. In the 6 years after Churchill's defeat, he became the leader of the opposition party and continued to have a huge impact on world affairs. In March 1946, he made his famous Iron Curtain speech, warning of Soviet domination in Eastern Europe. He introduced reforms such as the Mines and Quarries Act of 1954, which improved working conditions in mines, and the Housing Repairs and Rent Act of 1955. On January 15, 1965, Churchill suffered a severe stroke that left him ill. He died at home in London 9 days later, on January 24th, at age 90. He started his health scares in 1941. He went from having heart attacks to strokes, which also took his life 24 years later. This is Winston Churchill, and on the right is Churchill and his wife, Clementine. Joseph Stalin. Joseph Stalin was born on December 18, 1879, in Gori, Georgia. He rose to power as General Secretary of the Communist Party, becoming a Soviet dictator after Vladimir Lenin's death. He forced rapid industrialization and the collectivization of agricultural land, resulting in millions dying from famine while others were sent to camps. His Red Army helped defeat Nazi Germany during World War II. In 1901, he joined the Social Democratic Labor Party and worked full-time for the revolutionary movement. In 1902, he was arrested for helping with a labor strike and exiled to Siberia. The first of his many arrests and exiles after escaping from exile, he was marked as an outlaw and continued his work in hiding, raising money through robberies, kidnappings, and extortion. In 1907, he was connected to Tiflis bank robbery, resulting in several dead and 250,000 rubles stolen, which is approximately 3.4 million in US dollars. In February 1917, the Russian Revolution began. By March, the Tsar had abdicated the throne and was placed under house arrest in April 1917. Bolshevik leader Vladimir Lenin denounced the provisional government, and they argued that people need to rise up and take control by seizing land from the rich and factories from the industrialists. By October, the revolution was complete and the Bolsheviks were in control. In 1922, Stalin was appointed to the newly created office of General Secretary of the Communist Party. Lenin was unable to regain control over Stalin,